My name is Robert Arnold, and I was born in Port Pirie on February the 28th, 1933, which makes me about 89 years old. Oh, I had a brilliant childhood. Well, it was one of those things where you were surrounded by a really, truly loving family. That was the number one thing, because that sets you up for everything in your future life, which is demonstrated to be true. And we lived on the outskirts of the town, and we had the old salt swamps between our house and the last road to the north and the sea. So all the shipping would go past us and we could see it. And there were all these mangrove swamps to play in, and really had a lovely time. And we had great freedom. We'd come home from school, take off our school clothes and then put on our play clothes and come back at tea time. And that was how it went. And we did everything as a family together. We'd go to shoot a few rabbits for dinner and meals or something, and so we'd all go. And Dad would give us lessons in rifle shooting. He was very cognizant of the fact that you could get shot if you didn't know what you're doing. And he went through the First World War and got badly wounded. He was very conscious of the fact that you had to do things properly. So we learnt to shoot and catch rabbits, and then I got a big dog, and a kangaroo dog, and long weekends and stuff we'd go out catching kangaroos, which we could sell to the zoos around the world. So we did that for pocket money, and that was really very interesting as well. So there's all sort of stuff as you grew up that you did that was a bit unusual. And my father sang in a male voice choir, and the whole family was a musical family. And my mother said no one was to have a synthetic production of music until they'd learned to play an instrument properly. In other words, so you couldn't get a violin until you learned to play something on something. And so it was, first of all, it was a piano for everybody, and once you learned to play that properly, you were then open to discussion as to whether you could get a record player or something like that. And that worked very well because we all ended up being able to play something or other, and that tradition went through into my children as they grew up as well. So that all worked out very well. I wanted to go to the Navy or go to sea as a sailor, which I tried to do and couldn't. I was educated at Port Pirie High School, and you only could go there to year 11 because there wasn't any further on than that. And if you wanted to do year 12, you had to go to Adelaide to do it, which meant you had to have transport and the costing of accommodation and everything else, which was a bit more, my parents thought it was a bit too much, because both my parents were great believers in education, but they never ever considered going to university at all, and so that didn't enter into the game playing as far as they were concerned with me. So that was all right. Yeah, when I was 15, I tried. We had a commercial laundry as well as a few other things, and I was going to work in our own business, learning from the bottom up. Sweeping the floor was my first job, and then it was going down to the ships to pick up their soiled linen to wash it, and there was an English ship from a good family-owned shipping line that had a very serious engine fault, and they had to wait for a spare part to be shipped out from England, and so I was in Port Pirie for about 3 months, and we got to know them all very well. And I know that they had an opening for a cadet, and I used to see the cabins working into the mess area for an apprentice. You know, and that was what they were called, apprentices. And I thought, oh geez, this to suit me. And but it was not to be. I was offered a cadetship, but my mum and dad wouldn't agree, and my father took me into his confidence and showed me his will, and it meant that when he died and my mother died, I'd have all the shares in the company, and it would be my company, and that was really what he was doing. He had building this thing up, so I would have something to hang on to and do. So that was that. And anyway, I sort of, as I got older, I was a sailing nut. Well, we always had a boat of some description, and had a big one and a couple of little ones. And so I took my passion for sailing out in sailing in my own boat. I was working in the factory with my father, and my father's a very silent man, very quiet person, and I don't think I had any real conversations with him, but I had lots with my mother, and we had a very close relationship. My father had a medical problem that he didn't know about. I'd come back over from Whyalla to Pirrie to do some work on steam pipe replacement over a long weekend, and he went down to the hardware store to get some parts for this, and on the way back his aorta burst and he died while he was just driving along, and that was that. He banged into something and stopped. Mm-hmm. So we were then left with, we had quite a large business in Port Pirrie, and a dead copy of it in Whyalla, and there was it was me to run it, and I was unmarried, 24 years old, I suppose, and anyway, so we bought an aeroplane, and I learned to fly, got a licence, and we used to go to cross from, it was 15 minutes to fly across, where it was hours to drive around, and when you saw the cars on the road, you know, you thought it was a lot safer to do it anyway, so that's what we did, and that worked out very well. I won an international scholarship for a general management training in America, and so I went off to America in 1963. My mum, she was quite happy to run the business while I was away. And anyway, when I got back, when I was in Melbourne, I dropped in to see the managing director of the biggest dry cleaning and laundering of industrial garments company in Australia, and they offered me a job as production manager for the group, which was Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And my mum said, well, we should take it because it would be a challenge on a large scale, as long as I knew I thought I always knew what I was doing. And you better think about it pretty seriously, which I did. And we decided to do it. So we sold part of the business, and my mother kept the other part of it, and with management people to help her. So she had all the money from the factory just to keep her going, and then I was on my own in the brave new world. And so that was very interesting, and I was very good. I was quite successful. While I was there, one of the best analysis companies of things like productivity and increased production and stuff like that was working there doing a survey of the whole factory operation in Melbourne, and I was running the laundry, and sort of in front of them, and they could see what I was doing. They really did something they shouldn't have done because it was quite unethical. They offered me a job in the shoe manufacturing, which was the biggest of its kind. We were like the General Motors of the shoe industry, and we had conveyors and big bins that a little boy could sit in, and that deep, and sort of just sit in it and go tracking around up and down on these conveyors, then often up into the storage section and then out onto the deck for dispatch. And the kids loved it, and that was terrific fun. When you think about it now, I'd be terrified. Anyway, that was that, and one of the main suppliers of the conveyors was a New Zealand company called G.H. Mooney Proprietary Limited, and they offered me a job. It was a family-owned business. The family owned it all completely. The managing director made several trips out to Australia to supervise what was going on, and they had subcontracting engineers, to do all the work, which was all being done very well. And then the managing director had a fall in the factory and broke his neck and had died. So his son, who was going between Sydney and New Zealand, offered me the job as the general manager and the director of the company based in Wellington. So I took it and off we went to New Zealand. And the place was, it was interesting. I was guaranteed the cost of going over and returning by the people who were providing finance for the factory operation, because it owed them the money that they invested in this company was millions. It wasn't hundreds of thousands. And I had quite a good relationship with the managing director of the company, because I was with my sailing, I was racing anyway, and he had always wanted to have a sailing boat, but considered it was more important to get his job right, get settled in your profession, and he was running was the biggest privately owned investment company in New Zealand, because they wanted the security of somebody that knew what they were doing to get their money back if they needed to. That was a great experience because we were working with Maoris as well, and we had about 60, I think, of them. They all came from one tribe up from Otaki. And we provided transport for them, and which was like a delivery truck, and which had like bench seats bolted onto it to go. So it's a truck for us during the day, and then the transport for them in the afternoon, and then that was hilarious too. They drove me crazy because they lived in another world. And that world was the family and their friends and the tribe. And if there was a funeral, somebody died, then you had to have a ceremonial sort of period of grieving, and that was all I had to do. And he came up to me one day and he said that there was a death in the family, and we must go to it. Our hearts tell us to do so. So, what do you do? And I said, well, that's all right, because I'd got used to them by this time. I mean, you imagine me, here's this red hot production genius from Australia, and they got to have a ceremonial burial thing, and it was starting to stop work, you know. But that was that. I mean, that was the way it went, and I got used to it, and we had a really tremendous relationship with them. They had once a month, at the end of the month, we'd have a few drinks in the canteen before they left to go home, and an elder of the tribe was part of it, and Arda Hakarai was his name, and he and I would sit together in the canteen, and all the troops were sitting all around, and somebody had a guitar and there was another guitar, and the Maoris and guitars and beer, and you got a real sing-song going, which was really terrific. And then at about 4:30, Mr. Hakarai, because he wouldn't call me Bob, he would always call me Mr. Arnold, and I said, well, you call me Mr. Arnold and I'll call you Mr. Hakarai. And so, you know, occasionally he'd be there and we'd sit together, and everybody else was drinking beer and we're drinking Scotch whiskey, and then he would, about 4:30, he would say, Mr. Arnold, I believe it's time we left. And I said, Mr. Hakarai, I think you're right. So he had to simply stand up, and everything would stop, boom, and they'd all get on the truck and go home. And it was really quite remarkable, and it was a great period of work. We built the business up, and then we took to a place where it could be sold, and that's what we did. And then I decided this time I would come back to Australia, because Alison wanted to go to do a medical degree, and to do it she would have had to have left us in Wellington, or it was actually Heratonga, and go down to Dunedin, which is the university. And so if she went to Dunedin, I knew that would be the end of going back to Australia. We'd be stuck there, because we'd be there for another 7 or 8 years at least. And so we decided not to and come home. So we all came home to a very uncertain future. We started up a business bringing New Zealand product over to Australia and selling it here in Melbourne. And that was semi-successful, but we had a big shop in Baldwin on Whitehorse Road, and next door to the Baldwin Theatre, Baldwin Cinema, and they had a lolly shop. That was, you know, the thing with a cup of tea and a lolly shop. It was run by a bloke, a real estate developer who had sold his business, and he was not allowed to do anything that would intrude on his real estate business, because he had sold his, and for 5 years he wasn't allowed to re-enter the market. So he went to Perth on a holiday, and there he saw the first game shop in Australia. And ours was, we had actually made the second one. That was all the games like chess and all the war games and board games and card games and educational games, spelling games. We went into it in a fairly thorough way, and sold a lot of stuff to the education department. And then we ended up giving lectures to them on the different games, the different educational games that were available. And it was a really tremendously fun business. And the kids all helped. My daughter Alison, she had logged back in Melbourne too late to get into a university. So I said to her, well, you know, you can either just do it anyway, or you can manage the game shop for the year, for the first year, and then you can save up some money from that then you can go and work or go and get your degree or whatever you want to do. So she agreed to do that, so she ran the game shop and did an excellent job of it, and that led to her getting married actually. So she was a handsome young fellow in his Air Force officer's uniform from Perth. It was a completely committed games player. He played anything, and he really, that's what he loved doing. That was what he did. He just concentrated on that, and he was a winner too. He played games to win, not to muck around. And anyway, he and Alison struck it as being something that they could do together. We'd sold the business in New Zealand, come to Melbourne, set the shop up in Melbourne, the game shop in the big shop, the interior shop, and we sold there was a big laundry in Adelaide. It was very well run, but it didn't make a quid, and my job was to make sure it did make a quid, and I was offered the job, and so and Jan always wanted to come back here. And I didn't mind because I had never lived in Adelaide. I lived in Port Corinne, right, and then in Whyalla. So I came over for a starter. I was in Rotary in New Zealand. I joined Rotary in New Zealand and then came back here and joined a Melbourne Rotary Club, the Baldwin Rotary Club, and then came back here and joined the Blackwood Rotary Club. So I was involved with Rotary for a long time, and was a director. What you've got to do, you take a turn really in being the club president and a director of this or that or something else, and really that was quite good fun too. We had in New Zealand, in Melbourne, we had our main money race. We were able to hire the major car park at one of the big shopping centres, so we put a portable fence around it, and we'll get 500 or 600 cars in there. That was that big, and all the car slots, parking slots, you could get to drive in with your car and pay your money, your $5 or whatever it was, and you've got that slot to park in and sell your stuff. And so it was a car boot sale really, and that made really, you start at 7 o'clock in the morning and finish at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was really productive money-wise. We made thousands of dollars out of that, and that led to me, just really getting a feel for Rotary and what a great job it did in the community, and it was something to be followed through with, and so that's what we did, and that really was a very interesting time. Reading and music, piano, and sailing was my big deal. That was the thing I was really interested in, passionately interested in, and sailing and all that stuff to do with boats. And so you'd sail them in the summertime and work on them in the winter time. Really, that was how it worked. So there's plenty to do. Always plenty. They're never ending when the maintenance with a big boat or with a boat of any size, really. Yeah. So that was pretty good. Well, the biggest difference is that in my day, you made your own fun. Here, you in a big city, you look for it, and the young people look forward to be entertained. They've got no idea about doing it themselves, or don't want to do it, or don't know how to do it. But we used to have, I was a member of the yacht club, the Royal Port Pirie Yacht Club in Port Pirie, and I set up a training program for boys from the high school, boys and girls, and I ran a training program at the yacht club, and liaised with the senior master from the high school, and he provided this sort of club, if you like, institutions thing at the high school, so that every Friday afternoon, as far as the sports program was concerned, the group that wanted to do sailing could come down to the yacht club. You know, I'd take them over from down there and then teach them to sail. And it ended up, we bought a whole heap of boats. We just raised the money ourselves and just did it. And that was a very interesting part of my life too, because a lot of those kids, I was only probably 3 years older than them, but no, we were really nice young fellows and nice girls they were associated with, and it was just lovely to see it all happen, and it was a terrific relationships there. Yeah, it was good. It was really good. Marrying my wife. That was it. Still is. Oh, sure, we're still married in love, but it's you know, it's 63 years ago. I could do another 63. I met her in Whyalla, and I think probably 2 or 3 weeks after I'd met her, I proposed to her, and she accepted, and we've been married for 63 years and still going strong. Alison is number 1, which and she's a very serious girl, and likes to do everything properly. Alison got married, and she produced 4 children. The next one down is Jeffrey, and he's a really very prominent architect in Melbourne, and he and his partner live in Fitzroy, and doing very well. He really is a top architect, and he works for one of the busiest and most successful architectural companies in Australia. And then Peter, he died of bowel cancer at the age of 36, and we were building up a business for him, because he was a bit of a wild boy, and it was designed to straighten him up, which it did. And he became a model citizen, and then he died. The next one, or Susan, she's she got a finance degree, and has worked as an accountant, and she's the finance manager for the Anglican Diocese of Adelaide, and looks after the Archbishop's churches, and that was interesting too, because we're of the Methodist, so it's just a fascinating thing to see her develop into this position within the structure of the hierarchy of the church. And then there was Richard. He was a sculptor, and he worked in the factory here, and it was terrific for him because he no cost. He didn't pay for anything. I mean, we supplied him with everything, and I told him he was the only person, or the running the only business I've ever heard of that only had income and didn't have any expenditure whatsoever. Then and he was doing apps. He went from here to Germany to attend a big conference of craft artist people, and he wanted to go to it, which he did, and he went to a big art gallery somewhere around, I don't know where, and he's going in this room around that way, and he notices there's an older lady and a younger one going around that way, and they met here, and they're both studying this big portrait of a man from the 1800s or something, and of course boy meets girl, introduces himself, and suggests they might like to have a coffee, and if mother would excuse them, they would do that. So they do that, and next minute he didn't come home for 12 weeks, and you can imagine what was happening here. In the meantime, they'd fallen madly in love, and they were going to get married and have a baby and do all that sort of stuff, which they did do, and she's a lovely girl. And so the problem is he's living in Vienna. The girls and very bossy. So the girls have been brought up like that. So, and then Jan's a very independent lady as well. So we've got my mother, my wife, 2 daughters, and me. And I've got no hope. But it's lovely because they're so capable, and they just organise everything, and they're all so capable people that I just sit back and laugh. Yeah, well, how lucky am I? Well, my advice to them would be do what you want to do. Try and work out what it is that you want to do with your life, bearing in mind you'll probably be 40 years old before you really do know what you want to do. So you want to start off doing a university course. You've got to get a degree of some sort. So if it's to do with numbers, accounting, or to design work, architecture, or whatever you do, just get into it, and away you go. And if you're any good at anything, you'll do well. I mean, you've got to understand that you've got to work hard. It doesn't come easy being successful. It's not there's no magic wand. It comes by sheer hard work, and the person who works the hardest earns the money that you need to be successful. And that's what I'd say. Just concentrate on getting a good job to start with, bearing in mind that you'll change jobs 5 or 6 times before you get to the one you really want to do. And then once you find that, away you go. The care that I get, the girls are really nice, and they're very kind, and it's just lovely.